That was my height, 6'2". I was like a piece of wire. In fact, I got made fun of. So one of the questions that I get frequently is, how did I become a Catholic? Nobody in my family is a Catholic. I was the only person in my family, even to this day, who is a Catholic, other than now my wife. But I was raised as an Episcopalian, an Episcopal church, and when I became a teenager and went in the military, I really grew somewhat disillusioned with the church. It was going through a lot of changes and becoming very. It was just changing and becoming very non-traditional in its thinking and views, and so I felt that I just didn't feel at home there anymore, and so I migrated to the fundamental evangelical fundamentalist churches, and for 27 years I raised my family in evangelical schools and a Christian church. I went to many Christian churches as we moved, and had very great experience there. Very, I think it was a good. I felt like it was a good place at the time. But there was a point where I started realizing that every time I would hear a sermon on one topic, on one scripture passage, if I went to somebody else's church or another person's church, I would hear a similar passage spoken about, but from a very different context. And I felt like, to some extent, I was struggling with the idea that every passage had an unlimited number of interpretations and versions of what it could mean. And at that point, about that same time, both my sons were in a Christian school, and I had a regular meeting, unfortunately, with the dean of the school to discuss my son's behavior in school. I had lunch with the dean of the students, and we were talking one day, and he said, "Do you ever think we threw out anything with the Reformation?" And I thought about that, and I thought, probably, because knowing human nature, we tend to overreact and we throw out a lot of baby with the bathwater. And so at that point, it got me thinking. I started reading, and ultimately, my wife and I were due for a vacation. We ended up traveling to England, and we went to Oxford, and I went to the library, and I bought every book I could find on the early church, and specifically testimonies of non-Christians against Christians in the early church. Reading all of that really convicted me that there was a lot of things that the early church did that they thought were important that we had sort of gotten away from. So, make a long story short, I ultimately gravitated towards studying in a graduate school in a Protestant seminary up in Wisconsin, and was really looking specifically at early church history and patristics, things the early church taught, things the early church believed, things the early church really felt were foundational. And ultimately, that led me to the Catholic faith. And much like St. John Henry Newman said, the more you study early church history, the harder it is to not be a Catholic. And so I ultimately transferred to St. Meinrad Archabbey Seminary and School of Theology and finished that master's degree there. And in 2012, as I've told other people, I came into the Catholic faith as part of the Anglicanorum Cedibus, and that's how I joined the Catholic faith. So really my education brought me to the Catholic faith. My Catholic faith didn't bring me by education. I was sort of the opposite. I went through a process of discernment and education, and against all of my other family members who are mostly Episcopalians in the U.S., I ended up coming into the Catholic faith. My wife has made the same journey. It took her several years, but she made the same journey recently and also became in the Catholic faith. So that's how I got there. One of the aspects of my process or journey to the Catholic faith was an amazing process of events. There were many places that I had to travel to as part of my work, as part of my career, all over the globe, 40 different countries, where I kept running into different scenarios where I was pushed into scenarios that showed me where I was supposed to go. Even in Croatia, I went to, because we were very exhausted from walking all day, we stopped and sat down in a church, and it turned out to be a Catholic church with a Croatian Mass. But because we knew enough about the Mass, although we weren't Catholic, we'd heard it enough times, we were considering it, I was able to make out that Catholic worship, even though it wasn't even in my language. And I found that was one of the most beautiful things about the universality of the Catholic Church. It's very diverse, but yet it's also very universal, because no matter what country you go to, no matter what language the Mass is in, the Mass is similar in every country so much that you can attend it, and even though you don't speak that language, you will know what part of the Mass they were in by the reactions of the parish, by the people, by what you do. You will know exactly where the Mass is at. And I found that one of the most appealing and attractive parts of the Catholic faith was that people all over the world from different languages still all understood the Mass, and they still knew the Mass. And so no matter what country you go to, you can still worship comfortably and not wonder, how is this going to work? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And that was a beauty I really found in the universality of the Catholic Church, even though it's so diverse. So that's one of the things that I found was really significant in my journey, besides all of the areas we were pointed into, and all of the things that happened to us.